Hey, my friends, welcome back to another episode of the Dental Marketing Secrets Podcast on this beautiful fall day that I'm recording this. It is towards the end of October, and in Salt Lake, it is just gorgeous right now. We have so many trees that are just on fire with colors, gold, reds, oranges. It's just beautiful, wonderful time of year, and it's fun because it's a season of change. There's you see a lot of visual change going on outside in the mountains, the trees. You feel it too, just with the weather changing, especially at night and in the mornings. The temperatures are different, and I think it's a perfect time to be talking about this book, Traction. As we're wrapping up this 3-part series on how to get a grip on your business. It's a very good segue to, especially as we look forward to the start of 2024 and beyond. What are those things that we can do to really take that next step in our practice evolution, right? To better understand what our vision is, how we can serve our patients, and where we want to go, and how to get your team members on board with that. So it's been fun to go through this book. As I've mentioned before, I'm working through this book and this whole process right alongside you. And it's been very enlightening in so many different ways. Things that I felt like I had a good grip on, not so much, as I've been able to better understand what that means. And it's been neat to be able to clarify that vision and share that vision across our entire team and organization. And it just gives you so much more direction and so much more energy for moving forward. And so I'm excited to go through the last 4 components of the Entrepreneurial Operating System. We've talked about people, we talked about vision first, we talked about people next, and then today we're going to be finishing the last 4 components. But first, before we get into it, I want to let you know that our sponsor for this episode, SPP Dental Partners, is giving away a free copy of the book. Just go to their website, sppdental.com/traction, and fill out the form. It's as simple and easy as that. You can click the link in the show notes if you want, or just type it into your browser, sppdental.com/traction, and they will mail you out a free copy of the book. Again, they're doing this because they live by the SPP principles, by this EOS system, and it's been a huge help for their organization and for all their team members. And I know that this book is been widely adopted by a lot of different organizations in the dental industry. And so grab your copy. It's so much easier to get going on all these wonderful principles and concepts. So grab your copy at sppdental.com/traction. So as we get into this, we're going to start with there's 4 remaining components. So we have data, we have issues, we have process, and then we have the final component on traction. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the data component. And this is the section that focuses on using data to help you gauge where you are, where you're going, and if you're heading in the right direction. So picture for a second that you are a small plane flying over the Atlantic Ocean. Halfway across, the captain gets on the horn and announces, "I've got bad news and I've got good news." The bad news is that the gauges aren't working. We are hopelessly lost. We have no idea how fast we're flying or in what direction, and I don't know how much fuel we have left. The good news is that we're making great time. And sometimes it could feel like that too. Especially in marketing, to take a step back, it's easy to feel like that in marketing when you're throwing a lot of things against the wall. You're trying to see what sticks, but you don't have a great way to gauge that or to measure that or to properly attribute the success of campaigns. It's the same thing too with driving your business forward. If you don't have the right data in place, then it's hard to know how effective you are and what progress you're making. But data allows you to cut through all that guesswork and manage your practice through a handful of key numbers. Okay. And one of those that Wickman describes is this scorecard idea, which gives you an accurate pulse on your practice. It's kind of it's a tool basically that allows you to see what's going on and to gauge the health of your practice. And anything, we all know, a lot of us have heard this before, especially as we've, gone to, business classes or listened to podcasts or whatever the case may be. But anything that is measured and reported gets improved. You see improvement in that because there's multiple steps to the process. You're looking at it. You're first evaluating, identifying what's going on. The process of actually reporting on it is critical because then there's more accountability. There's more ownership there. And just those couple of steps combined results in a greater awareness, heightened awareness on what's going on, and a general improvement happens as well. So it's a pretty cool concept when you think about it. But the challenge is that most practices don't have a way to do that. They're not operating with a scorecard like tool. They might rely on their profit and loss statement. But you take that, for example, your P&L, and that's something that's already happened. That's a trailing indicator. You have no opportunity to change that. And so it's not something that you can look at and make proactive changes to preempt some undesirable circumstances. It's something that's already come and gone. And it can be helpful to an extent, but it doesn't allow you to adjust course at that time. But scorecards can be that tool to help you understand what's happening right now in your practice, giving you time to course correct if you need to. And Rudy Giuliani was a great example of this. When he was the New York City mayor, when he first became mayor, he implemented his own type of scorecard as one of the first things he did when he took office. That was one of his first items of business. And this basically what it did is enabled local precinct commanders to see patterns and trends. And then they could react and, assign or deploy officers where necessary. And because in the past, all they had these trailing indicators that they were looking at. They looked at the number of arrests and response times to 911 calls. Again, those are things that had happened. And are they important to measure? Yeah, they are. But they're not something that you can take and implement right away. It's not giving you a pulse on what's going on in the now, right? And when Giuliani did this, when he implemented this system, and it was something different than a scorecard, but the concept was the same. In 8 years, the murder figures were down by almost 70%, and overall crime went down about 65%. So it was a huge success. That is a huge change, And so as we look at this process we look at the importance of, creating a scorecard. Think about that. Think about what type of change, what type of positive change that you can affect on your practice as we're going through this. So here's how to create a scorecard like this. So imagine having only a single piece of paper with a handful of numbers on it. And these numbers must allow you to have a good pulse, an accurate pulse on your business. Okay, so that's the scenario. So what are the numbers that must be on there? This is for you to look at and decide. You need to determine what categories need to be on there. What do you need to be tracking on a weekly basis to have an accurate pulse of your practice? Okay. And that could be categories like, production. It could be collections. It could be profit. It could be number of new patients. It could be production per patient, case acceptance. It could be number of appointments. Again, you want to come up with these figures or these numbers that you can track that can help give you an idea of how your practice is doing right now, but also could give you clues that, hey, there might be something going on here that we need to make a change or we need to adjust for. We've seen, our overall number of appointments has been going down the last couple of weeks. What do we need to do to change that? Sometimes it's seasonal, sometimes it's not, but things like that can give you a heads up that something might be brewing, right? And your goal with this scorecard is not to come up with an endless list of numbers to track and make it overly complex. Your goal is really just to end up with 5 to 15 different numbers. Ideally, you'd be closer to you'd be closer to 5. That would be ideal, but it's not always something that you can just narrow down like that. So 5 to 15 is what Wickman recommends, so that you don't feel overwhelmed. Okay. So Scorecard is basically, and if you were to look at one, he gives an example in the book, and it's pretty simple. You take a Google Excel, you take a Google sheet, or an Excel sheet or something like that, and it's just you've got on, let's say your first column is the assignment. Who has that assignment, right? So so you've got who. The next column you've got measurables. Who's in charge of basically reporting on those? So is the first column. Measurables is the second column. So you have those numbers that you're going to track. Could be again, it could be production for the week. It could be number of appointments for the week or number of new patients for the week. Whatever the measurable is, goes in that second column. The third column is your goal, is your targeted goal for that specific measurable. And then it's just a calendar. Then it's just a week by week for 13 weeks. You want to have essentially a rolling 3 months. So you've got, January, February, March, if you're starting fresh in 2024, and you've got all those weeks listed out. And then each week, the last one just falls off, or the oldest of those 3 weeks falls off. And again, this is just to give you a snapshot of what's going on in your practice. So you can kind of see those trends, hopefully preempt any of those big dips, by taking action now. And this is what's so cool is that it is a much more proactive approach to solving problems than looking at things in the past, like your P&L. And that's the power of this component in the EOS framework and in this particular tool in the scorecard. So that's kind of the main gist of the data component. There's other things too. I have to kind of breeze over some of these things. He has a lot of good stuff in the book, and that's another reason. Just grab a copy of the book. You're going to get so much more out of it. But for time's sake, we're just going to focus on that right now. So moving on to the issues component. When you have this one is really understanding you're going to uncover those issues, right? As you try to make changes in your practice, or you're trying to improve what you're doing in your process and everything like that, issues are going to come up, right? It's inevitable. Every practice has their issues. Successful practices have their issues. They're not reserved for those practices that aren't doing well. You're going to see these no matter what. But the longer you let them linger and fester, the worse they become, the more detrimental they become to your progress. And Wickman gives a great analogy. He says problems are like mushrooms. I guess it's a simile. Problems are like mushrooms. When it's dark and rainy, they multiply. Under bright light, they diminish. So the idea being, let's get all these issues out on the table. We can see them, we can shed some light on them, and you'll start to notice, just again, by identifying those issues, what they are, reporting on them, you're going to start to see them go away. You're going to see them start to get resolved. And this framework provides that bright light to illuminate those issues and eventually eliminate them. And there's two parts to this process. So first part is to create what's called an issues list. And then the second part is to create an issues solving track. Okay. But again, just remember the issues are going to pop up. That's absolutely normal. It doesn't mean your practice is struggling or it's not set up well or anything like that. But the good news too to all this is that there are only a handful of issues that crop up over and over again. Businesses of all different types of industries typically only, they'll face the same type of issues. And so again, it's not something that's abnormal. It actually happens to all businesses of all types. And the first step to this particular component and this approach, really, where you're getting these issues out on the table, is to create a workplace where all of your team members feel comfortable bringing those issues to the table, that they're okay with articulating those and pointing them out. And that starts with your leadership. That starts with you. It starts with any of your department leads. They have to be, and you have to be, open and honest with each other. As they say, as the leadership goes, so goes the practice. But the challenge with this is that it can feel, for some people, it can feel like a personal attack. If an issue is the result of one person's negligence or maybe just a lack of awareness, it can feel like that is a pointed attack at them. But it's not. Again, all comes from this ability to be open and honest to help overcome those types of feelings. And just remember, no one has ever died from being open about issues. You have really nothing to lose and everything to gain. So start with your leadership meetings, and then allow that to start to trickle down to the rest of your practice. And people are going to be hesitant, like I mentioned at first, but just remind them and reassure them that no one's going to be fired for raising an issue. You're not going to be let go because you brought up an issue in hopes to better the company, right? That sounds silly when you frame it like that, but I think there is some hesitation around that. They don't want to be the one to point things out. And there's a lot of people that are willing to, which is great, but just encourage that type of behavior. Okay. And this is what's interesting, is that this is also a good indicator of how healthy your practice culture is. If people are comfortable raising issues, then you have a healthy practice as far as culture goes. If they don't, there's some things that you could work on there. Okay. So when we get to the actual issues list, there are 3 parts to this. Okay. So there's in your issues list in your vision. Okay. So all issues that can be shelved, these are issues that can be shelved for beyond 90 days. They should be tackled in future meetings, but they're not necessarily a big enough priority to handle right this week or right this quarter. You still want to make sure that they're on the list so they're visible and you don't lose sight of them. But these are ones that you don't necessarily need to pick on or pick at right then and there, right now. Okay, so these are issues like, they could be key employee issues, they could be technology needs, they could be an office relocation. Those are possible examples of issues that you want to shelve for future use, right? They're not necessarily exactly what you need to focus on right now. The next part of your issues list is this weekly leadership team issues. So these are ones that are on a much shorter time frame. They're relevant for this particular week or quarter, and they must be tackled at the highest level. So they're specific to leadership versus departmental. Okay. So if it's departmental, then you want to push it down. But these issues that are specific to leadership are typically more strategic in nature. They are, things like issues you could be having with goals that are being off track, or maybe there's a bad number on someone's scorecard, or key employee issues, or there's major patient difficulties. So things like that could relate to processes and systems and things of that nature, but that need to be addressed soon. Like they need to be addressed this week or this particular quarter. Okay. And then the last section on the issues list is departmental. So these are all things that are relevant specifically to that department, things that need to be addressed this week or that quarter. So you're starting to see a theme here. You want to keep those issues that are high priority, that need a resolution soon, this week or this quarter. Anything beyond that needs to be shelved for future use because you don't want to overwhelm yourself. Okay. And those things on the departmental issues list, you could find things like, maybe it's in the back office department. You might have some clinical issues that need to be sorted out, adjusting your process there. There could be, patient treatment complaints that need to be worked on. Your front office, it might be something like case acceptance, or it could be scheduling concerns or things of that nature that need to be addressed this quarter. Okay. One thing to remember too is if you're struggling to have your team members bring issues to your meetings, then try this approach. Your next meeting, make it mandatory for everyone to bring 2 issues to that meeting. Okay. You have to bring 2 issues to that meeting. Again, you're just trying to build that culture where it's totally okay to raise a concern. And with the context that, hey, we're bringing these concerns to the table because we want to make this practice better. We want to make our experience better. Okay, so that's what I'm talking about when we discuss creating an issues list. The next thing is the issue solving track, and this is a simple tool to help resolve your problems. And there's 3 parts to the issues solving track, and it's IDS. So identify, discuss, and solve. And to start, when you're looking at these issues, you have to first examine which issues are most relevant. And I was talking about that before. When you're building out these lists or have your different lists, you have your vision list, you have your leadership, you have your departmental. The only lists that you should be focusing on right now are the ones that need to be solved in this quarter. Okay. It could be even that week. But anything beyond that, you have to shelve, just because it's going to be, you can't be weighed down with every single last issue that needs to be solved in order to accomplish your vision. You just get way too, that's way too much work. So you have to prioritize and take them in order. So just select the top 3 issues to be solved, and then utilize this track, this solving track, this process of identifying, discussing, and solving to make progress on those issues. Okay. So when we talk about identify, pretty straightforward, but clearly identify the real issue at hand. Sometimes the stated problem is not really the one that's causing the issue. It's actually a few layers down. It's sometimes you'll see that with kids where they ask a question, but what they're really asking is a few questions deeper than that. Their real concern lies a few layers down. So make sure when you're discussing these issues that you're treating or you're identifying what the real issue is, the real sore spot is. Okay? Because a lot of times it's just the stated problem will just be a symptom of the real issue. So you've got to dig deep in order to find the root of the matter and address it properly. Okay? And in this step, plan on getting a little bit uncomfortable. Again, these most causes of real issues are people-based. People can sometimes take that as a personal attack on them, and you don't want them to feel like that, right? So you have to make sure you articulate the reason why we're doing this, that we're focusing on the issue, we're not focusing on the person, and we're really doing this to build, raise the level of the practice overall. Okay. Second step of discuss, again, very straightforward, but it's nice to have a process to this, right? You're going to likely spend the majority of your time on this step. And a lot of times, and that's because it's hard to, with a lot of these, especially the more nuanced problems or issues, you rarely identify the real problem before you start discussing. And so you can't really solve anything until you get to this discussion step. And this is really where you want to just everything out in the open. You want people to feel comfortable voicing what the issue is and what they think, even offering a solution at this point, but more importantly, let's get the issue out on the table. Let's look at it. Let's dissect it, see it from different angles. You just want a robust discussion of what's going on right now. Okay. This gives everyone a chance to chime in on what's going on and how it affects them in their role. And it's so helpful to be able to get a 360-degree view on this issue so that, one, you can clarify what is the cause of this problem, and 2, you have a much better chance of solving this or resolving this for good. Okay. One tip that Wickman shares in this, which I thought was really, really smart, is that everyone should say what they believe, but they should only say it one time. Because when you start bringing it up more than once, then it becomes politicking. And I've seen that. I think we've all seen that at times where there's one person who keeps bringing it up and they're just trying to they're just trying to affect the outcome in their favor, right? It's not necessarily for the good of the practice. It's for their own personal gain. Okay. So try and establish that rule early on that everyone can voice whatever concern they have, but you can only say it one time. We don't want to get into this jockeying back and forth and people, trying to steal the microphone and focus on what's good for them as opposed to the good of the whole. Okay. The other tip is to just be careful when you're doing this. Be on the lookout for tangents. This is an excellent opportunity for people to get off track, right? So just be aware of that and try and have some type of signal or reminder for everyone to get back on track. Like, hey, that's a great thought. We're going to put that in the parking lot right now. Or, hey, we've got a tangent alert. Let's get back on track. Again, you're not trying to offend anyone or anything like that, but you're trying to stay focused on the task at hand. The final step is to solve the issue. And once you have clearly identified it and discussed it properly, oftentimes the solution is pretty clear, and in this step, you're going to assign basically an action item for someone. You're going to walk away and someone's going to have some homework, which will be the resolution to this issue. It ends up on their to-do list, and when it's completed, the issue goes away forever, right? There's another little story in the book that I wanted to share. And this is George Pearls. I don't know if I said that right, but he was the head coach of the Michigan State Spartans from 1983 to 1994. He once gave a dinner talk at a function, and he shared a mantra from his days as an assistant coach for the Pittsburgh Steelers during their heyday in the 1970s. He said, "We made every decision like we were going to the Super Bowl, and they ended up winning the Super Bowl 4 times. That is what your leadership team needs to do. You should make all of your decisions as though you're going to your own Super Bowl, as though you were achieving your vision." I love that. Make your decisions based on your vision, right? What you want to accomplish. And you'll see amazing things start to happen. Okay. So that's the issues component in a nutshell. Again, there's so much more to it, but I'm trying to just cover high level. Next is the process component. Okay. And this is really about strengthening those core processes that make up your practice. Okay. Because nothing can really be fine-tuned until it's consistent, right? You have to be able to consistently do something, and then you can look at it, evaluate it, and optimize it from there. And this is where your processes come in. You have to get that baseline first. After that, you can then make sure everyone understands how to do it, values them, follows them, and then we can look at improving them. Okay. According to Wickman, this is actually the section that's most often ignored. But when I think of this section, I think of there's a TV series called How It's Made. And for those of you who have seen this, it's a really fun little documentary style show series that walks you through how a particular product is made. It could be, I watched one on those chocolate gold coins, right? And every step in that process that's required to make one of those chocolate gold coins. And what's so neat about this, and I think what's so empowering about this, is that you can break down what you do in your practice into these manageable steps. Okay, you think of it just like this TV show, like you're walking someone from step A to step Z, and you're showing them exactly how to produce this result every single time. And it's such a powerful concept because it makes it so much more predictable in the future. It makes it duplicatable. Okay, and I talked about this in one of the earlier episodes from the series, but just how Michael Gerber calls this the franchise prototype in his book, The E-Myth. But just this idea of franchising your practice, where you have documentation for all these processes that you do in your practice. That way, it's all clear. It's easy to communicate exactly what's expected to everyone, but it's also easy to plug in people that are new to the role or new to the responsibility. You can have someone come in there and they have everything they need to be successful because it's all detailed out for them. And I've done this. I've done this in my business. I remember when I first started hiring for a while, it was just me. My business was just me. But then as I started to expand and add team members, this was a huge component to my success, was being able to put all those processes down on paper and allow someone to come in and work through those, have something to fall back on and reference when they get stuck. And obviously I'm still there to answer any questions, but it just makes it so much easier, that whole onboarding process. Plus, like we mentioned before, now you have something that's consistent. Now you can go back and say, where can we improve this? What adjustments can we make to achieve a better outcome? Okay. And that's really what this whole component of the EOS framework is all about, is detailing out what those processes look like. And there's 2 steps to that. The first one is identify your core processes. So in this case, it's a good idea to schedule a meeting with your leadership team. You're going to spend time to identify and agree on what to call your core processes. You're going to list them out and say, okay, we're going to call it this, the marketing process, the HR process, the billing process, however you want to name it. But it's important to get on the same page with language so that everyone can understand each other appropriately. Okay. You're going to see too that typically you're going to cover the following areas: marketing, HR, billing, insurance, clinical. I mean, you're going to see a lot of these they're common throughout for a lot of practices, for a lot of businesses. Okay. Another thing to remember is that no matter how many core processes you have, you need to identify the ones that address every activity going on in your practice. Then list them in one document and make sure that your leadership is 100% on the same page with the amount, the names, what they are, everything like that. Again, you're trying to establish a clear language and clarity around the whole idea, so that when you speak about it, you know what they're talking about and there's not any confusion regarding that. You see this a lot in marketing, where people will say things that are, in conversation have sometimes become synonymous, but they're clearly different, and so it can cause a lot of confusion on what you're really talking about in the end. But this is something that is absolutely worth every minute you spend, because I know a lot of people might be thinking, documenting all these processes, that's going to take forever. And it does take time. There's no question. But I can tell you from my own personal experience, the benefit from this is extraordinary. Like, it's 10x what you put into it. It clarifies expectations. It crystallizes the process because you have to articulate and write that out. And like I mentioned before, it gives you the chance to improve it more easily. You're not just going off of things that you've done in the past, but you're looking at it analytically and seeing, okay, we could make this adjustment here, and that's going to actually save us a few steps, save the patient a little bit more time, whatever the case may be. It's just going to result in a better outcome. It also reduces the amount of internal errors that you see in your practice because there's not a clearly documented process to follow. Okay. All right. The second part is you've identified what you're going to call them. The next is and you've listed those out on paper. The next step is to document each of the core processes. And this is where you get your leadership involved, the person in charge of each of those processes. So in the insurance process, the person in charge of insurance is going to be the one to spearhead that process and to document all those steps involved for insurance. They're the person who's going to make sure that everyone's clear on what needs to be done and that they remain on task and on track. Okay. And it's important to remember that during this step, you want to be, we say document all your processes. I'm not saying like every absolute last, detail imaginable. You want to do this at a high level. So the old 80-20 rule. You want to focus on the 20% that produces 80% of the results. Okay. Don't get so bogged down that it takes you years and years and years to do this. You just want to document the primary steps, right? So the 20% that gets you the 80% of the results. So, and if you focus on the 20%, you're probably going to need about, he says about 5 to 6 pages per core process. Okay. So that gives you a little bit of idea of what to expect. But again, you're just try and focus on capturing the basic steps. You want enough information so that your team understands what the required steps are and how to, that's really basically it. You just want to know what's expected of them. And that's going to lead to a drastic reduction in missteps that cause lapses and internal blowups and things like that. And once you can start getting all these things out on paper, you're going to likely see that there are steps that are redundant, things that you can remove. And you're going to see maybe, hey, these two steps can be merged. They can be combined. You're going to streamline that process as you get it out on paper and you discuss it with your team. And here's another great tip too. Whenever you're building out these processes, include a checklist whenever you can. There's a reason why checklists are used in, very stressful situations, because they're easy to follow, right? It's easy to create consistency, quality control, repeatable results. And we're used to checklists, right? A lot of us live by checklists. We wake up and do our to-do lists, things like that. So they're very relatable. And it's a great way to produce consistent results. Okay. So that's pretty much the process component. The last component is the traction component. And what we're talking about here is we're talking about the action really, let me rephrase that. We're talking about making your vision a reality. Okay, this is where you move from concept to practice. It's all about execution. Your ability to create accountability and discipline and then execute is the area of greatest weakness in most organizations, is what Wickman writes. And I think that's important to remember. It's not that people don't have a good vision, or they don't have great ideas, or they don't have great people in place. He said the area of greatest weakness for most organizations falls in this ability to create accountability. Okay. So it's putting the rubber to the road. You're trying to bridge the gap between vision and execution. And to do that, you need to bring in these elements of discipline and accountability so that people know what's expected of them and that there's something on the line, right? They're going to have to report on their assignments. And that can make people feel uncomfortable. Quite frankly, when you introduce discipline and accountability into an organization that didn't have that before, there's going to be some discomfort there. But that's the inevitable part of creating traction. Okay. And Wickman shares there's two components to gaining traction. He said, first, everyone must set specific measurable priorities. And he calls these rocks. And then second, you must meet better as an organization. And he calls this a meeting pulse. Okay. And I wanted to share a few things. He shares a bunch of different before and afters, before traction versus after traction. And I want to read a few of those because they're very relatable. I think we all can feel these same sentiments at times, especially the before part. He said, here's some quotes that he had from different organizations he's worked with. I really didn't know who I was accountable to. Or before rocks, there was no clarity. Or another one said, I've worked here for over 20 years and before rocks, I was never in the loop. I think that happens all the time. People just feel like, hey, I'm just doing my role. Like they have no concept of how much they're contributing to the company and moving it forward. Here's another one. We were fairly disciplined about creating one-year goals, but would frequently find ourselves at the end of the year having made no substantive process or progress toward these goals. It was tough to stay focused on them throughout the year. Totally get this. It's easy to get excited about goals when you create them first of the year, working out, going to the gym. But come Q2, Q3, Q4, some people can't even remember those goals, right? And so what's so neat about traction and this whole process is that and in particular, this meeting pulse, it keeps you on track, and focusing just exclusively on these rocks. And I'll talk about what those are in just a sec. It keeps you focused on those things that matter most and on track for the entire year. Okay. And then let's read a few afters. After rocks, everyone on the team has responsibility, clarity, and timing on what has to get done. Also, each team member is clear on his or her accountability. Everyone is on the same page. Boom. That alone is enough to get me going. Just knowing that everyone's on the same page, everyone's rowing in the right direction. They have their marching orders and they're going about them on a regular basis, can you imagine what you'd be able to accomplish if you had your whole team on board doing that? Seriously. I mean, and year after year, you're doing this quarter after quarter, year after year. How much different would your practice look in a few years? It wouldn't take that long to be a completely different practice on a completely higher plane. That's what's so cool about this whole approach, right? So let's describe what rocks are real quick. So rocks, as he describes them, are short-term priorities that must be done within the next 90 days, that must be done during that quarter. You want to keep these short. You don't want to, again, overwhelm yourself. I mentioned that before, but just a reminder, when you're getting into these, he says typically 3 to 7 priorities, but you can have even fewer if it's on the individual level. Okay. So 3 to 7 at most, and they're priorities that must be done within the next 90 days. High level priorities, ones that you should be focusing on right now. Okay. And again, we're only looking ahead 90 days because we want to stay focused. We don't want to 1-year vision, 5-year, they're great and they're important to have, but it's easy to not make much progress because they feel so far away. 90 days gives you, it's something that we can conceive of a little bit more easily. And we can be moved by that because we realize that it's actually not too far away. Okay. And rocks. So why the term rocks? Let me go there. So he calls them rocks because there was so Stephen Covey, author of Highly Effective Habits, 7 Highly Effective Habits of Effective People or something. I can't remember what the book is called, but great book, which by the way, he describes, so he kind of put it this way. He said, picture a glass. There's like a glass on the table, right? And you have all these things next to the glass. You have rocks, you have sand, you have gravel, you have water, and you have to fit these all in this glass, right? And so we'll start with sand, we throw in some gravel, we throw in some rocks, and then we put the water in, and it doesn't fit, but he said, when you start with the rocks, which are your main priorities, when you start with the rocks, and then you trickle down, you go to gravel, and then you do the sand, and then the water fills in whatever's left, you can fit everything in. So that's why he calls these rocks, is because you focus on those first. Okay. So here's how it works too with these rocks. So you're going to set rocks for the company, and you're going to do this with your leadership team, and then you're going to do rocks for specific to the leadership team. After that, you communicate those rocks to the entire organization, and then each team member ends up creating their own rocks. And this whole process creates alignment. This whole process allows you all to, again, because you're creating these rocks based on that vision. You start with the company rocks, and then you're looking at the leadership team rocks, and then you're looking at the individual team member rocks. Okay. So then those all should be really kind of dovetail into each other. And what he recommends is to meet with your leadership team once each quarter. And he said, typically this is best if you do it towards the end of the quarter, because then you can review what you accomplished this quarter. And then you're going to establish what the rocks are for the organization for the following quarter. Keeps you on track. There's kind of a nice flow to it. And when you're meeting together, you're going to write on the whiteboard, basically list out everything that has to be accomplished within the next 90 days. Oftentimes you're going to get, 10 to 20 different items on that whiteboard, although sometimes it could be a lot more, and then this is where you spend time as a leadership to discuss, to debate, and then ultimately you're going to determine which of these priorities are going to be your rocks for the next 90 days. You make a decision on whether to keep it, to kill it, or to combine it as a company rock for the quarter. You're trying to narrow this down to 3 to 7 rocks per quarter for a company. You don't want to overwhelm yourself. This is how you gain traction, is by focusing on a few things at a time, right? After that, you set a due date, which again is typically going to be the end of the next quarter. And then you'll follow up on that when you have your next quarterly meeting with your leadership team. You also want to make sure that each rock is specific, it's measurable, it's attainable, it's not some just generic goal that you're setting. So a good example on that could be, you're going to create a new landing page for all-on-4 dental implants. That's very specific, that's measurable, it's attainable. You can do that in a quarter, no problem, right? And then you assign who owns that rock. And that person is going to assume responsibility for that priority, right? And you only should have one owner, because if you have more than one owners, it creates confusion and then nothing gets done. So only one person is assigned to that rock. And that is the person that's going to drive that rock forward. They're going to outline the next steps needed in order to accomplish that goal. They're going to get other people involved when necessary. But ultimately, they're going to be the one that's accountable for that rock. Once all your company rocks are set, then you move on to the leadership team. Okay, they can carry forward. Let's say there's some company rocks. Let's say if one of those falls on a leadership team, because each rock is going to be assigned to someone. So let's say if you're on the leadership team and you get one of those company rocks, then that's part of your 3 to 7. Or it could be even 1 to 3. If it's a big enough thing. But just again, keep them very manageable. If there's some of the rocks that you discussed as an organization that didn't get picked up, maybe those could be on rocks for your leadership team, as long as, again, they align with what you're trying to do for that specific quarter. But keep them short. Don't give yourself too many. I can't stress that enough. The next step is creating a rock sheet. And basically what this is just a visual sheet of paper that's going to show what the rocks are for the company. They're going to show the rocks for the leadership team. It's going to show even the rocks for all the individuals. And then it's going to also indicate who's the owner of each rock. And then at the very top, you're just going to have a due date. Okay, these are, for Q3 2020, or let's say Q4 2023. These are our rocks as an organization. Here's our rocks for the leadership. Here's our individual rocks. Okay, you want that to be clear. You want to share this with everyone. Again, you want to get everyone on the same page and rowing in the same direction. And then each quarter you meet with your leadership team, but also each quarter you're going to meet with your entire organization. You want to give them a progress update on your vision, on what you've been able to accomplish, and what you've been able to, and what you're looking forward to the next quarter. What are your rocks for the following quarter? There's a really cool story of one of the companies, a company called Image One, that adopted this approach. And this guy said, he was talking about the cumulative power of all those rocks. He said, one year during our annual all-company meeting, I had an idea to go around the room and ask every team member to tell us a few of the rocks they accomplished during the year. While each person was talking, I was writing the rock on the whiteboard. By the end, I was off the whiteboard and onto many pieces of paper from the flip chart. When you have a team of 35 people like we do, take that number and multiply it by 2 rocks per person for a quarter, you get 70. Then multiply that by the number of quarters in a year and you get 280. That is the magic number. We took 280 steps in the right direction over the past 12 months. Amazing. Isn't that cool? Imagine if you could say that as a practice. We probably don't have as many people, but even if you said we took 45 steps towards our vision this year alone, measurable, important steps. That would be so cool. Your practice would look so different and feel so different. So that's that is essentially that's what, when we're talking about rocks, that's what we're talking about. Okay. The last thing is this idea of meeting pulse. Okay, and this consists of 2 types of meeting. First, there is a quarterly meeting, and the first is a quarterly meeting, and the second is a weekly meeting. And these are designed to, again, ensure that you're aligning and everyone's in congruency there with what you're trying to do, trying to stay on track. You don't want people to get distracted or anything. As people veer off track, you start to lose them. Your vision, your traction goes out the window, and then it's so much harder to gain that momentum back. Okay, so that's what this meeting pulse is designed to do, is to have a weekly meeting, have a quarterly meeting to ensure that everyone's lining up and rowing in the right direction. It's also cool if you want to, hold your leadership meeting, your quarterly leadership meeting off-site when possible. It's going to be nice to avoid, well, it can kind of spur on fresh ideas. You're not as easily distracted too because you're not at the office where there's so many things that you need to be doing anyway at the office that you can kind of feel distracted by that. So whenever possible, try and have it off-site. And Wickman provides an excellent meeting agenda for these types of meetings in the book. So make sure you grab your free copy. It's pretty detailed, on how to start. There's multiple components to that meeting agenda to keep you on track each time. I'm not going to go through it on this right now, but he does provide that in there. So grab your copy of the book. And this is, again, the weekly meeting. Let's talk about the weekly meeting. It's a check-in. You're wanting to make sure that the ball's still rolling, everything on track. And this is for your leadership team. It does happen every week. These are mandatory meetings. You don't want to disregard this, or you don't want to discount this meeting. The only excuse for not attending would be vacation or death. That's how important it is. You want people to be there and be ready and be present. If not everyone can make it on that day, then you keep the meeting anyway. You want that consistency. You want to keep it on the same day and time each week. It's easier to remember. It makes it part of your process for the week. And during that time, you're going to review your rocks, provide an update on the progress. You're going to review what's next on those, to-do list. But the majority of your time is going to be spent with any issues that you have that you're facing right now. Okay. You're going to follow that IDS framework, the identify, discuss, and solve, to work on those issues. And again, that's where the bulk of this meeting is really going to be spent, is on these issues. Okay. So that's kind of it, you guys. There's so much, and I appreciate you hanging on until the very end, because there is so much in here. And so if you haven't listened to the other 2 episodes, please do so. Grab your copy of the book. It is a game changer. I'm going to say that. And I'm implementing these things right now as we go through this. And already I've seen a huge uptick in productivity, in clarity, in vision, and direction. It's just been fantastic. So make sure you grab your copy of the book. Go to sppdental.com/traction. I'll link that up in the show notes. Again, thanks to our sponsor, SPP Dental Partners, who use this framework and are generously agreed to provide a free copy of the book for anyone who wants it. So sppdental.com/traction. And as always, you guys, if you enjoyed this episode, let me know. I love to get, you feel free to email me, or go to our website, dentalmarketingsecretspodcast.com. Shoot me a message on there. Please leave me a review if you've enjoyed the show, wherever you're listening to the podcast. That would be a huge help. And as always, my friends, it's been a pleasure. Until next time, be good.